Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring. And now, it is time to rest. As always, I will tell you a kind legend that once took place in our beloved Middle-earth. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin. In the deep twilight of the Fourth Age, when the memory of the ring had long faded into song and story, Middle-earth had changed beyond the knowing of most. The dominion of men stretched wide, from the white towers of Gondor to the far northern vales, once shadowed by dark forests, and the tongues of the Eldar were but whispers in ancient libraries. Yet in the green heart of Erin Lasgallen, which in elder days was called Mirkwood, a flicker of the elder days still glimmered faintly. There, beneath the vast trees older than kings, the last elves of Middle-earth dwelt in quiet seclusion, clinging to their fading realm as leaves cling to a dying branch. King Thranduil yet reigned in those woods, though his hair had turned silver as frost. Few among the Eldar remained to serve him. Hunters, craftsmen, and a handful of maidens who still sang beneath the starlit boughs. They lived not for glory now, but for remembrance. For though time passed them slowly, the weight of years pressed upon their spirits. The call of the sea was ever in their hearts, a soft and ceaseless whisper bidding them depart from the mortal shores. It was in this waning age that word came to Gondor of strange doings in the north. Travelers spoke of shadows moving in the woods where no shadows should be, of lights like pale fire glimmering through the trees, and of voices calling from the darkness. Few believed these tales, yet one man did, Eldarion, son of Elisar and Queen Arwen Undomil. He was king now, though still young and restless in spirit. He had inherited his father's courage and his mother's grace, and though the world of men thrived, he longed for a taste of the old adventures of which he had been told as a boy. So it was that Eldarion gathered a small company of loyal rangers and rode north, following the old road that once led through the greenwood. His banner bore the white tree and 7 stars, and his heart was full of both purpose and wonder, for he had never beheld an elf, not with his waking eyes, though his mother's kin were of that kindred. The elves had passed over the sea long before his birth. After many days of riding beneath autumn skies, they came at last to the borders of Erin Lasgallen. The forest was beautiful still, though quiet as a grave. The leaves whispered faintly in the cold wind, and the scent of pine and earth filled the air. No birds sang, no deer stirred. It seemed to Eldarion that the very air held its breath. They crossed beneath the trees and the light dimmed. The road was narrow, overgrown with moss, and roots twisted across it like the bones of the earth. Then, from the shadows ahead, voices called in a tongue that was fair and strange. The company halted, hands upon their swords, but Eldarion lifted his hand, for he recognized the music of the elven speech, though he knew not the words. Out from the gloom stepped 3 figures, clad in grey and green. Their faces were bright as moonlight, their eyes keen and sorrowful. One among them was taller than the rest, a woman with hair the color of autumn gold. She looked upon Eldarion with surprise and a kind of wonder, as though she beheld a memory brought to life. "Son of the Evenstar," she said softly, "you walk in the woods of the Eldar unbidden?" Eldarion bowed his head. "I come not as an enemy, but as a friend," he answered. "Rumors of darkness have reached the south. I seek your king, Thranduil of the Woodland Realm." At his words, the elf woman exchanged glances with her companions. "The king speaks to few now," she said. "His halls grow silent, and his people fewer each year. Yet you are of his kin by the blood of Elros, and by that bond, perhaps he will grant you audience. Follow us, if you dare the fading paths." So Eldarion and his men followed the elves deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to close around them, their trunks like pillars of some vast cathedral. Strange lights flickered in the distance, neither fire nor lantern, but a cold shimmer as if starlight had fallen among the roots. Then, after a long and silent march, the forest opened into a glade. There, half hidden by ivy and silver birch, stood the last woodland hall. The gates of carved oak opened without a sound. Within, the air was cool and fragrant with ancient cedar. They entered a hall vast and dim, lit only by the glow of lanterns hung like stars from the ceiling. Upon a throne of white wood sat Thranduil, king of the woodland realm. His crown was of autumn leaves, his eyes deep and weary. When he spoke, his voice was like wind through the trees. "Welcome, son of Elessar," said the Elven king. "Long have we waited for tidings from the world of men. Yet I fear you bring news that stirs old shadows." Eldarion stepped forward. "Dark tales are told again of this forest," he said, "of voices that haunt the night, and a presence that chills the heart. I would see the truth of it, and if evil yet lingers here, I would see it ended." For a long moment, Thranduil was silent. Then he rose, tall and proud, though his shoulders bore the weight of centuries. "Evil never wholly dies," he said at last. "It sleeps, and in the silence of the years it wakes anew. There are places in these woods where even the stars forget to shine. You seek truth, King of Men. Then you shall have it." He turned to the golden-haired maiden who had led Eldarion through the woods. "Lehereth, my granddaughter," he said. "Guide him to the dark places. Show him what stirs beneath our roots." The maiden bowed, though there was sorrow in her eyes. Eldarion felt the chill of destiny in the air, as though unseen powers had already set their course. Thus began the last adventure of the Elves of Middle-earth, and the journey that would decide whether their light would fade quietly or blaze once more before the final twilight. The night deepened as Eldarion and his companions were led through the winding halls of Thranduil's underground realm. Though the air was still and the stone walls gleamed faintly with the luster of age, the place felt more like a tomb than a palace. Ancient carvings of leaves and stags adorned the pillars, yet dust lay thick upon them. The laughter of the elves, once famous for its brightness, was gone. Silence reigned where once the woodland feast had echoed with song. Lehereth, Thranduil's granddaughter, walked ahead, her lantern casting long golden rays upon the floor. Her movements were light as wind over water. Eldarion watched her as they went, seeing in her face the mingling of youth and something far older, a sorrow beyond the measure of men. At length they came to a small chamber, where the travelers might rest. Its walls were draped with green hangings, embroidered with silver threads, and a faint light, soft as dawn mist, glowed from a crystal set upon a table. When the others had withdrawn, Lehereth lingered by the doorway. "You are bold to come so far north, King of Gondor," she said quietly. "Few of your kind now venture into these lands. Fewer still return." Eldarion smiled faintly. "My father once walked these woods in darker days. I would not let his courage go unremembered. And I could not stand idle while rumor of evil grows again in the north." Lehereth's gaze was steady, but in her eyes flickered a light like distant starlight. "Evil indeed stirs here. It began as whispers, a chill in the air, strange shapes among the trees. Then some of our hunters vanished, leaving no trace but the echo of their cries. My grandfather would not leave this forest, though the sea calls him daily. He would guard what remains until the end. But the end comes swiftly now. Before Eldarion could answer, a low horn sounded through the halls, 3 notes, clear and grim. Lareth turned sharply, her face pale. "A summons," she murmured. "Something has happened." Together they hurried back through the tunnels to the great hall. There they found Thranduil, standing beside a wounded elf, his silver robes stained with dark blood. The elf's breath came in shallow gasps, his face white as marble. "Speak, Tarion," the king said softly. "What have you seen?" The elf's eyes fluttered open. The darkness. "Beneath the roots," he whispered. "Dol Guldur stirs again. I felt it moving in the earth, cold, hateful, like a shadow reborn." Then he shuddered and grew still. Thranduil closed the fallen elf's eyes and stood in silence for a long moment. Then he turned to Eldarion and Lareth. "So it begins," he said. "The poison that once dwelt in Dol Guldur has not wholly perished. Some remnant of the necromancer's craft endures, feeding on what remains of our strength." Lareth's voice trembled, but the fortress was cleansed by the Lady of Lorien herself. None could have survived her wrath. Thranduil's expression hardened. Perhaps not in body, yet evil of that kind is not so easily destroyed. It may linger as a will without form, waiting for the world to grow weak. Eldarion stepped forward. "Then let us go there and see it ended. My sword was forged for such a task." Thranduil looked upon him keenly. "Your courage does you honor, son of Elisar. But Dol Guldur is a place of death for all who trespass. The very stones remember the malice of its master. Still," he paused, as if listening to some inner counsel. "Still, if the fate of our people is to be decided, we cannot hide in shadows. Go then, if you will, and take what aid remains to me." He turned to Lareth. "My granddaughter, you shall lead them. You know the ways of the forest better than any who live. Take 5 of our best archers, and seek the roots of that cursed hill. If the evil can be undone, do so. If not," his voice faltered, "if not, return, and we shall depart these shores at last." Lareth bowed, though tears shone in her eyes. "I will obey, my lord." That night, under a waning moon, Eldarion and his chosen company prepared to leave the woodland halls. The elves brought forth their bows of yew, their silver blades, and cloaks woven of the forest's own shadows. Eldarion donned a cloak of grey-green and fastened it with a brooch shaped like a leaf, a gift from Lareth, wrought by her own hand. When dawn came, pale and cold, they set forth. The forest loomed about them, vast and silent. The path they followed wound northward, through thickets and ravines, toward the dark hill where Dol Guldur had once stood. As they went, Lahareth spoke softly of the old days, the time before the darkness came, when the trees sang and the stars were mirrored in the rivers. Eldarion listened, feeling as though he walked through the fading dream of another world. By midday they reached the borders of the old shadow. There the light dimmed, though no cloud crossed the sun. The trees grew twisted, their bark blackened as if by fire long past. A foul scent hung in the air, like iron and ash. None spoke. The elves moved with silent grace, their eyes ever scanning the gloom. Then they saw it, the ruins of Dol Guldur rising from the mist. What had once been a fortress was now a heap of broken stone, overgrown with briar and thorn. Yet the very air around it seemed to hum with malice. Eldarion felt the hair on his neck rise, and his hand went to his sword. "Do you feel it?" Lahareth whispered. "The breath of something waiting." Eldarion nodded. Aye, it waits for us. They crossed the threshold of the fallen gate, and the world seemed to grow colder. No bird sang, no wind stirred. The silence was thick as ice. Within the ruins, the stones were scorched and cracked, and faint traces of runes still glowed upon the walls, wards long faded, remnants of the enchantments that once held evil at bay. Suddenly, one of the elven archers cried out and fell, clutching his chest. A shadow passed over him like smoke. From the darkness between the stones came a whisper, low, mocking, and ancient. "Foolish children of the fading light," it hissed. "You cannot unmake what was wrought in death." The company drew close, weapons ready. A shape began to form before them. A darkness given body, cloaked in tattered gloom. Where its eyes should have been, there burned two pale fires. The shadow lifted a hand, and the air around them grew heavy with dread. Lahereth's voice rang clear. "Begone, servant of the Nameless One. Your master is fallen, and his works are ended." The shadow laughed, a sound like breaking stone. "Ended? Nay, fair daughter of the dying race, I am the echo of his will. I am the memory of his wrath." Then it struck. Cold swept through the ruins like a storm. Eldarion's men staggered, their breath freezing in their throats. But the King of Gondor drew his blade, and it shone with white fire, the light of Andúril reborn. He cried out the words his father once spoke. "A Elbereth Gilthoniel!" The shadow shrieked and withdrew, fading into the walls. Yet its laughter lingered, echoing down the stone corridors. When silence fell again, Lahereth looked upon Eldarion with awe and fear. "It knows us," she said softly. "It remembers the blood of kings, and the light that destroyed its master." Eldarion sheathed his sword slowly. "Then we will remind it why it fears the light." And so they pressed deeper into the ruins, unaware that each step drew them closer to the heart of the lingering darkness, and to the secret that would decide the fate of the last elves of Middle-earth. The light of day could not pierce the mists that lay heavy over the ruins of Dol Guldur. What sun there was seemed sickened, pale and distant, and the company moved beneath it as shades among shadows. The forest had drawn back from this place long ago. No root dared pierce the black soil, and the trees that stood nearest bore the look of watchers, crooked, lifeless, and silent. Eldarion led the way with sword in hand, the faint glow of its edge casting a wavering light upon the fallen stones. The air was thick, and the sound of their steps echoed strangely, as though they walked in a hall of unseen depths. Behind him came Laerith, her bow ready, her keen eyes ever upon the dark archways. The 5 elven archers followed, their faces stern, their movements as quiet as thought. They passed the outer wall, its stones veined with old scars from fire and siege, and entered a long corridor that led downward into the hill. Ancient carvings still marked the walls, runes of warding and defiance wrought by Galadriel in the last days of the Third Age. But now those runes flickered faintly, their power failing as if smothered by a weight of years. At the end of the passage they found a stair descending into blackness. Eldarion paused, holding aloft his sword. "Here the darkness thickens," he said. "Yet our path lies downward, if we are to find what stirs beneath." Lahereth nodded. Dol Guldur was a fortress above the earth, but its heart was always below. There the necromancer wrought his craft, and there his shadow lingers still. So they began their descent. The air grew colder with each step, until their breath smoked before them. The stair wound deep into the hill, narrow and steep, and the sound of dripping water echoed from unseen caverns. At length they came to a great door of iron, half buried in rubble. Strange symbols, black as soot, marred its surface. One of the elves knelt beside it, tracing the carvings with a gloved hand. "These are not the runes of the Eldar," he said softly. "They were made by servants of the enemy." Eldarion raised his sword, then let them be unmade. With a single blow he struck the door. The sound rang like thunder, and the iron split apart, its hinges shattering. A rush of air, foul and cold, swept over them, and the torches flickered low. Beyond the broken door yawned a vast chamber filled with gloom. They stepped inside, and the ground trembled beneath them. The chamber stretched wide, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood a black stone altar, cracked and cold, and above it hung a faint shimmer of light like smoke rising from unseen fire. Upon the walls, strange marks glowed faintly red, pulsing as if with a living heart. "It feeds," whispered Laerith. "But on what?" Eldarion approached the altar, his steps slow, his eyes wary. There, upon the dark stone, he saw a fragment of metal, small and twisted, yet shining faintly with a dull red gleam. He reached toward it, and the air seemed to recoil. Laerith cried out, "Do not touch it!" Too late. The king's fingers brushed the metal, and a shock of cold pierced him to the bone. In that instant, he saw, not with his eyes but with his mind, a vision of the past. The towers of Barad-dûr falling, the ring destroyed in fire, and yet, amid the ruin, something small and dark escaping into the world like smoke on the wind. He staggered back, breathing hard. "It is a shard," he gasped. "A remnant of one of the 9 rings, the ring of Khamûl, the shadow that ruled here." Laerith's face went pale. If that is true, then the spirit we faced is bound to it still. The wraith cannot be destroyed while its vessel remains. "Then we must destroy it," Eldarion said grimly. "Tell me how." The elves exchanged troubled glances. "Only the fire that once unmade the One Ring could wholly destroy such a thing," said one. "Yet that fire is gone from the world." "Then we must find another way," Eldarion replied. He turned to Laerith. "You are of the Eldar. Is there no power left in your songs? No light of the stars that might cleanse this evil?" She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Perhaps. There is a place, not far from here, where an ancient spring flows beneath the roots of the forest. Its waters are said to have been blessed in the days when the Lady of Lorien walked these woods. If any purity remains, it is there." Eldarion nodded. "Then we carry the shard there, and end this shadow for good." As he spoke, the faint shimmer above the altar thickened. From it rose a voice, cold and cruel. "You cannot escape me, child of kings," it hissed. "Your blood remembers my terror. You shall serve me, as all mortal flesh must." A wind burst from the altar, flinging them backward. The light of their torches went out, and in the darkness, a form began to gather. A figure tall and wreathed in smoke, its eyes burning like coals. "Go!" cried Eldarion, raising his sword. "Take the shard, Laerith. I will hold it off." But she didn't flee. Drawing her bow, she loosed an arrow straight into the shadow's breast. The shaft struck true, bursting into a flare of white flame. The wraith screamed, a sound that split the air like lightning, and for a moment its shape wavered. "Now!" shouted Eldarion. He struck with Anduril's air, the blade blazing with light. The shadow recoiled, its form scattering like mist in wind. Yet even as it faded, its laughter echoed through the chamber. "You cannot kill what is already dead," it whispered. "The world of men shall forget you, as it forgot your fathers. The elves shall fade into dust, and I shall endure." Then it was gone. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was broken only by the sound of Laerith's breath. She bent and lifted the shard, wrapping it in a cloth of silver silk. "We must go," she said. "Each moment we tarry, its malice grows stronger." They left the ruined hall and made haste toward the upper world. But as they climbed, the walls seemed to close in, and from the darkness below came faint whispers, many voices murmuring in tongues long dead. The air grew heavy with dread. When at last they emerged into the open air, night had fallen. A cold wind swept through the trees, and far off, lightning flickered upon the horizon. Eldarion looked back once at the ruins, their broken towers black against the sky. He thought he saw movement there, a flicker of pale fire in the windows, but it was gone in an instant. "We have what we came for," he said. "Now let us see if hope yet lives in these woods." So they turned from Dol Guldur and began their journey toward the spring of Lorien, where light and darkness would meet once more, and the fate of the last elves of Middle-earth would be tested in fire and sorrow. The company moved swiftly through the darkened woods, bearing the wrapped shard as though it were a living thing that might stir if given breath. The air seemed colder now, and though the stars shone faintly above the branches, their light could not pierce the gloom that hung about the trees. It was as if the shadow of Dol Guldur followed them, silent and unseen, drawing near whenever they paused. Lahareth led the way, her lantern casting golden circles of light upon the forest floor. The elves walked in utter silence, their steps light as falling leaves. Eldarion followed close behind her, his hand never far from the hilt of his sword. He could feel the weight of the shard even from a distance. A pulse, faint but steady, like the heartbeat of some slumbering beast. By dawn they reached the river that wound its way through the northern woods. The water was dark and cold, whispering over smooth stones. They paused upon its banks, weary from the night's march. Lahareth knelt and dipped her hand into the current. "This river once flowed clear and bright," she murmured. "It carried the songs of my people from one glade to another. Now even the water remembers fear." Eldarion crouched beside her. "Does this river lead to the spring you spoke of?" "Aye," she answered, "though the way is not straight. The spring lies deep within the forest's heart, where few have walked since the lady departed. There the old magic sleeps still." She glanced toward the bundle held by one of the elves. "If any power remains to cleanse that which was corrupted, it will be found there." They crossed the river at a shallow ford and continued westward. As they went, the forest began to change. The trees grew older and thicker, their roots like coiling serpents across the path. Patches of mist clung to the ground, and strange lights flickered in the distance. At times Eldarion thought he heard faint voices calling his name, soft, mournful, and familiar. He spoke low to Lahareth. "Do you hear them?" She nodded, her face grave. "They are the lost ones, the spirits of elves who perished here when the darkness first spread. They wander still, bound to the earth they once loved. Do not answer them, for they yearn to draw the living into their sorrow." So they pressed on, eyes averted, until the whispers faded. By midday they came to a clearing where sunlight fell in broken shafts through the high canopy. In the center stood an ancient oak, vast and hollow, its bark silvered with age. Beneath its roots flowed a small stream, clear as glass. "This is the path of Nimrodel," Lahareth said softly. "It is said that her spirit once lingered here when she sought the sea. Follow the water. It will lead us to the spring." They followed the stream as it wound between moss-covered stones. The air grew lighter, and the gloom that had hung upon their hearts began to lift, though faintly. The murmur of the water was sweet to hear, like a song half remembered from a dream. Yet even as hope stirred among them, Eldarion could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. That night they made camp beneath the roots of a great beech. The elves stood watch in pairs, their bows strung and ready. Eldarion took the second watch with Laherith. The forest was still save for the rustle of leaves. For a time they spoke little, each lost in thought. At last Eldarion said quietly, "You spoke before of the sea's call. Do you hear it as others of your kin do?" Laherith gazed westward through the dark. "Every elf hears it, though we resist as long as we are able. It calls to the heart like the sound of home long forgotten. My grandsire has resisted it for centuries, but even he cannot deny it forever. When this task is done, I think we shall depart at last." Eldarion was silent. The thought of a world without elves struck him with sudden sorrow. "And what will remain when you are gone?" he asked softly. She turned to him, her eyes bright in the firelight. "You will remain. The race of men was born to endure where ours must fade. Do not grieve for us. We have had our time, and our songs will linger in the world's memory." Before he could reply, one of the elves cried out from the shadows, "Something moves beyond the trees!" They sprang to their feet. Eldarion drew his sword, and the fire leapt higher, casting wild shadows across the glade. From the darkness came a low, whispering sound, neither wind nor voice, but something between. The leaves trembled, though no breeze stirred them. Then, out of the mist, figures appeared, tall and thin, their forms half transparent. Their faces were pale as moonlight, their eyes hollow. They drifted toward the camp, their movement slow but relentless. "The lost ones," Laherith breathed. "They have found us." The spirits circled the fire, their mouths moving soundlessly. Eldarion felt their cold gaze upon him, and for an instant he saw visions of long years gone by, elves dancing beneath starlit boughs, laughter echoing in halls now fallen to ruin. He felt their grief tug at his soul, drawing him toward them. "Do not listen!" Laherith cried. She lifted her voice in song, a melody pure and high, filled with the beauty of the elder days. The spirits faltered, their forms wavering like mist in sunlight. The elves joined her song, their voices blending in harmony, and the air grew bright with a silver light. Eldarion took up the song as best he could, though his voice was mortal and rough beside theirs. The spirits gave a final cry, a sound of sorrow and release, and faded into the night. When silence fell, the forest seemed at peace once more. Laherith lowered her hands, her face pale but calm. "They are gone," she said, "freed at last from their wandering." Eldarion sheathed his sword and looked upon her with wonder. "Your song drove them away. I have never heard its like." "It was a song of remembrance," she said softly. "Not to banish them, but to remind them of the light they once knew." The company slept little after that. When dawn came, they set out once more, following the stream as it wound deeper into the forest. The air grew clearer, the trees greener, and birds began to sing again. Before noon they came upon a valley hidden by high ridges. In its heart lay a pool of crystal water, fed by a spring that flowed from beneath a great stone carved with ancient elvish runes. "The spring of Lorien," whispered Laherith. "Here the lady once blessed the waters. If hope still lives in Middle-earth, it lives here." They gathered around the pool, and the elves laid the wrapped shard upon the ground. Eldarion knelt beside it, his hand upon his sword hilt. The air was still, yet full of quiet power, as if unseen eyes watched them from the trees. "Then let it be done," he said. "May this evil find its end in these waters." But as Laherith bent to cast the shard into the spring, a voice rose again from the forest behind them, cold and mocking, nearer than before. "Did you think to flee me so easily, children of light?" it whispered. "The ring's shadow walks with you still." And from the trees beyond the pool came the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, and many. The shadow had found them once more. Out of the trees they came, dark shapes, swift and silent, moving like smoke among the branches. For an instant, Eldarion thought they were shadows only, tricks of light and fear. But then the first arrow struck, hissing past his ear and shattering against the stone behind him. The elves scattered, their own bows flashing in reply. The still glade erupted into chaos. Laerith seized the bundle that held the shard and cried, "To the spring! Keep it safe!" She darted toward the pool, her golden hair streaming like fire in the half-light. Eldarion was beside her in an instant, his sword blazing as it left its sheath. The attackers poured from the darkness, tall, twisted figures in tattered cloaks, their eyes like dull embers. They were neither wraiths nor living men, but something between. Servants of the lingering shadow, their souls bound to its will. The first of them lunged toward Laerith. Eldarion met it with a sweeping blow that cleaved through shadow and bone alike. The creature shrieked and fell, vanishing into a mist that smelled of iron and ash. But three more pressed forward, their long knives flashing. "Hold the line," Eldarion shouted. The elven archers formed around him, their arrows flying with deadly grace. Each shaft struck true, and yet for every foe that fell, another seemed to rise from the darkness. The glade rang with the clash of steel and the cry of ancient voices. Laerith reached the edge of the pool. The water shimmered faintly, glowing with a light that seemed to come from beneath its depths. She tore the cloth away from the shard, and for an instant it gleamed red, pulsing like a living heart. Her hands trembled as she held it over the water. "Now!" cried Eldarion. "Cast it in before—" A sudden wind roared through the glade, extinguishing the torches and bending the trees. The air grew thick with cold. Then, from the shadows beyond the pool, the wraith appeared again, tall, shrouded in darkness, its eyes burning with pale fire. "You cannot destroy what was forged in death," it hissed. "Your light falters, and your world fades. I am the memory of dominion." It raised a hand, and Laerith was hurled backward as though struck by a hammer. The shard fell from her grasp, landing upon the stone beside the pool. A crack ran through the ground, and a black mist began to seep upward. Eldarion charged. His sword blazed like a white flame, cutting through the wraith's veil. The creature staggered, its form wavering, but its laughter filled the air. "You carry the light of your father," it said. "But even he could not destroy us all. I have waited for you, son of kings." They fought upon the edge of the spring, light and darkness clashing with a fury that shook the earth. Each blow of Eldarion's sword drove the shadow back, yet with every strike the light of his blade dimmed a little, as if the very strength of his will were being consumed. The wraith's voice grew louder, filling his mind with whispers. "You are mortal. You cannot prevail. Submit, and your people will endure." "No," Eldarion shouted, forcing the words from his lips. "The time of shadows is ended." He struck again, and this time the blade pierced the wraith's chest. There was a blinding flash. The shadow shrieked, twisting upon itself, and for a moment it seemed to falter. Laerith rose to her knees, her face pale but resolute. She crawled toward the shard, grasped it with both hands, and hurled it into the spring. The water erupted in white flame. A sound like the ringing of distant bells filled the glade, and a wave of light swept outward, driving the darkness before it. The wraith screamed, a sound of rage and despair, and its form began to unravel, torn apart by the brilliance that surged from the spring. Eldarion fell to his knees, shielding his eyes. The air was filled with wind and light, and for a moment he felt as though he were standing beneath the stars of Valinor. Then the light faded, and all was still. When he opened his eyes, the glade lay quiet. The water of the spring was calm once more, its surface clear and bright. The wraith was gone, and the darkness with it. Only a faint mist remained, rising like smoke before vanishing into the sky. Laherith knelt beside the pool, her hands trembling. Eldarion went to her side. "Is it done?" he asked softly. She looked into the water, and her eyes filled with tears. "It is done," she whispered. "The shard is gone, and with it, the last echo of that shadow." Around them, the forest began to stir. The wind carried the sound of rustling leaves, and the faint song of birds returned. Light fell through the canopy, warm and golden. It was as if the land itself breathed again after a long sleep. The surviving elves gathered around the pool. Their faces were grave, yet there was hope in their eyes. One of them, a tall hunter named Thalion, bowed to Laherith. "The darkness is ended. The forest will heal in time. But our strength wanes. The call of the sea grows stronger with every hour." Laherith rose slowly, gazing westward. "I know," she said. "The age of the Eldar is over. This was our last duty, to cleanse the land we once guarded. Now we must go where our kin have gone before us." Eldarion felt a sudden ache in his chest. "Then you will leave," he said. "All of you?" She turned to him, and her eyes were full of quiet sorrow. "There is nothing left here for us now. The light of the elves must depart from Middle-earth, lest it fade into shadow. But the world of men will thrive. That is as it was meant to be." He bowed his head, struggling to find words. "Then at least let me ride with you to the havens," he said, "that I may see you safely to the sea." Laherith smiled faintly. "You are kind, son of Elisar, but the path of the elves is not for mortal feet. We will travel swiftly and unseen, as our kind has always done. Yet know this, our friendship will not fade. When you look upon the stars, remember that some of their light is ours." Eldarion said nothing. He only watched as the elves turned from the glade, their cloaks blending with the forest's green. Laherith lingered a moment longer, her hand brushing the bark of an ancient tree. Then she looked back once, her gaze meeting his. "Farewell, Eldarion of Gondor," she said. "Guard well the age that dawns." And with that, she was gone. The king stood alone beside the spring, listening to the fading footsteps until the forest grew still again. The pool shone softly, its light reflected in his eyes. He knelt and touched the water, cool and clear, and whispered, "May your road be gentle, daughter of the stars." Then he rose, mounted his horse, and turned southward. Behind him, the glade lay peaceful once more, and from its heart rose a single white blossom, blooming where the darkness had been. The last elves of Middle-earth had fulfilled their final task, and their song faded into the west. But the memory of their courage endured, carried in the heart of the King of Men, and in the whisper of the wind through the waking woods of Erin Lasgallen. The days that followed were bright and strange. The sun shone again upon Erin Lasgallen, but its light seemed softer, gentler, as though it, too, felt the passing of something great. Eldarion and his company remained in the forest for a time, tending to their wounded and burying those who had fallen. Of the 7 elves who had set out from Thranduil's hall, only 3 remained. They sang as they worked, songs of farewell, haunting and beautiful, that carried through the trees like wind over water. When all was done, they turned their faces south toward the realm of men. Yet even as they rode, the forest seemed to whisper to them, bidding farewell to its last guardians. No more did they hear the wailing of lost spirits or the echoes of dark voices. The air was clear, the streams bright. It was as though the shadow had never been, save in memory. Still, Eldarion could not find peace. He thought often of Laerith and her kin, wondering if they yet lingered somewhere beneath the trees, unseen. At times he fancied he heard their voices on the evening wind, soft and distant, like the sigh of the sea upon a far shore. After 7 days' journey, they came to the edge of the greenwood, where the lands of men stretched wide and green. There they made camp upon a hill, and that night Eldarion dreamed. He stood upon a white shore, and before him lay the sea, endless, glittering beneath the stars. Far out upon the water, he saw a ship, its sails silver in the moonlight. Upon its deck stood Laerith, her hair shining like pale gold. She raised her hand in farewell, and her voice carried to him over the waves. "The world is changing, son of kings. Guard what is left, for even light may fade if not tended." Then a wind rose, and the ship sailed westward, vanishing into the mist. When he awoke, the dawn was breaking, and the dream left a heaviness upon his heart that words could not ease. By midday they reached the ruins of an old watchtower upon the border of the forest. There they found a rider waiting, one of Eldarion's scouts who had ridden ahead days before. His face was pale, his cloak torn by long travel. "My lord," he said, bowing low, "I bring tidings from the south. Strange lights have been seen in the skies over Rovannion. The people whisper that sorcery walks again." Eldarion's heart tightened. "What kind of lights?" "White and green flames that dance across the horizon, vanishing before dawn. Some say it is a sign from the Vala. Others fear it is the work of foes unseen." The king looked north toward the forest they had left behind. The sky there was calm and clear. "No foe stirs in the woods now," he said. "If these lights are of evil, they come from another place. Yet I fear their meaning. The world grows restless." That night, while his men slept, Eldarion stood alone beneath the stars. He thought of his father, who had seen the end of the Third Age, and of his mother, who had forsaken immortality for love of him. He thought, too, of the Elves who had sailed westward, leaving behind a world that no longer belonged to them, and he wondered whether the age of men would prove wiser, or merely stronger. The next morning they set forth again, following the river running southward. The land was fair and green, and the air carried the scent of new blossoms. Yet as they rode, Eldarion felt a strange unease, as though unseen eyes watched their passage. Once or twice he glimpsed movement among the trees, a flicker of white, too swift for mortal sight. "Do you see it?" one of his men whispered. "Something follows us." Eldarion nodded. "Do not draw your blades. If it means us harm, we shall know soon enough." They rode on, and near sunset they came to a clearing where an ancient birch stood alone. Beneath its branches lay a small figure, cloaked in grey. Eldarion dismounted and approached cautiously. The figure stirred and looked up, and he saw that it was an elf, pale and wounded, his garments stained with travel and blood. "My lord," the elf gasped, "I am Galion of Thranduil's guard. We were attacked upon the road to the west. Thranduil is wounded. He would not leave the forest, though the shadow is gone. He bade me seek you if peril came upon him." Eldarion knelt beside him. "Peace, friend. You are safe now. Tell me, who attacked you?" Galion's eyes clouded with pain. "Men," he whispered. "Not of Gondor or Dale. Wild men from the east, bearing strange devices. They spoke of fire and vengeance, and of a master who would rise anew. Eldarian's blood ran cold. A master? Who? But the elf's strength failed him, and he spoke no more. They buried him beneath the birch, and when the grave was closed, Eldarian stood long in silence. "This cannot be ignored," he said at last. "If Thranduil yet lives, we must return to him. Whatever darkness still lingers in the east must be rooted out." His men looked uneasy, but none gainsaid him. So once more they turned their faces north, retracing the path they had come. The journey was swift and grim. No bird sang now, and the wind carried the scent of smoke. On the third night they reached the borders of Erin Lasgarlan, and there they saw it. A red glow flickered beyond the trees, and the air was thick with ash. The forest was burning. Eldarian spurred his horse forward. "Ride! To the king's hall!" They plunged into the woods. Flames leapt from tree to tree, roaring like beasts. The sky above was black with smoke. Through the haze they glimpsed shapes moving, men in crude armor, bearing torches and axes, their shouts echoing through the night. The rangers charged, cutting through the raiders like wind through reeds. Eldarian's blade shone with fierce light, and where it fell, none stood against it. Yet there were too many foes, and the fire spread faster than they could fight. At last they reached the hill where Thranduil's halls lay hidden. The entrance was half collapsed, the great doors scorched and broken. Eldarian dismounted and entered, calling aloud. "Thranduil, king of the woodland realm, it is Eldarian of Gondor." His voice echoed through the dark tunnels. From the shadows came a faint sound, a cough, a whisper. Eldarian ran forward and found the Elven king lying upon the floor, pale and still. His silver crown was tarnished with soot, his garments torn. Yet when Eldarian knelt beside him, Thranduil's eyes opened, bright and clear despite his wounds. "So, you have returned," the king murmured. "I knew the shadow would not rest so easily." Eldarian grasped his hand. "What has happened?" "Men from the east," Thranduil said faintly. "They bear symbols I have not seen since the Second Age. They seek something left behind in Dol Guldur. But they do not understand the danger they awaken." He coughed, and blood stained his lips. "The world of men has inherited our burdens. Be wary, son of Elisar. Darkness can wear many faces." Eldarian pressed a hand to his shoulder. "You will not die, my lord. I will not allow it." Thranduil smiled faintly. "Even kings cannot command the sea, nor stay the passing of years. My time is done. But Lehereth, did she find peace?" "She did," Eldarian said softly. "The shard is destroyed. The forest is free." "Then all is well," Thranduil whispered. Tell her I am coming." And with that, his gaze turned westward, and the light in his eyes faded like the last star before dawn. Eldarian bowed his head. For a long time, he knelt there in silence, while around him the forest burned, and the cries of battle echoed far away. At last he rose, his face set and cold. "Gather the wounded," he said. "We will not let his death be in vain. The East will answer for this." And as the flames died upon the morning wind, the king of Gondor looked upon the smoking ruins of the last elven kingdom, and swore an oath that would bind the fate of men to the memory of the firstborn forevermore. Dawn rose pale over the smouldering woods of Erin Lasgarlan. The air hung thick with smoke, and the once green canopy stood blackened, its leaves turned to ash. Among the ruins of the woodland realm, silence reigned, a silence not of peace, but of mourning. Eldarian stood upon the hill above Thranduil's fallen hall. Around him lay the bodies of men and elves alike. their final struggle written in soot and blood. The fires had been quenched by the night's rain, yet the scent of death lingered. The King of Gondor felt the weight of ages pressing upon him, for before him lay the end of an era. He turned to his captains, grim men, weary and smoke-stained. "Have the enemy been driven out?" he asked. "Aye, Lord," answered Captain Doran, his voice hoarse. "Those who were not slain fled eastward into the wilds, but they left their mark upon this place. We found their banners among the dead, strange sigils, black upon crimson. They bear the mark of a rising sun crossed by a blade." Eldarion frowned. "No house of men that I know bears such a device." "It is old," said another voice, a frail one, yet clear. Eldarion turned and saw one of the surviving elves approach, limping but unbowed. His hair was silver, his eyes dimmed by centuries of care. I have seen that sign before, long ago. It was the mark of the Easterlings of Rhûn, those who served the Dark Lord in the wars of old. They were broken when Sauron fell, but not all of them were slain. Some fled into the east, carrying their hatred with them. "Then it seems that hatred has found voice again," Eldarion said. His gaze drifted eastward, toward the distant plains beyond the mountains. The morning light gleamed upon the horizon like a blade's edge. "They seek power, as all such men do. And if Thranduil spoke true, they may seek that which should never have been found." He looked down upon the fallen Elven King, whose body lay wrapped in a shroud of silver cloth. "We will bear him with honor to the river," he said. "The king of the woodland realm shall not lie among ruins." So they labored through the day, gathering what could be saved. By evening, they bore Thranduil's body to the banks of the forest river, where the waters still ran clear despite the ruin of the woods. There they built a small ship of white birch, its prow carved in the shape of a stag's head, the emblem of his house. When the light of the first stars appeared, the elves sang a final song. Their voices rose like wind through hollow halls, speaking of the elder days, of kingdoms long faded, and seas undying. Eldarion stood apart, his head bowed, listening. At the song's end, they set the vessel adrift. It glided upon the water, its silver lantern burning softly. Slowly it drifted away, downriver toward the western lands and the sea beyond. Eldarion watched until the light vanished into the dark, and the last echo of elven song faded into silence. Only then did he speak. "This is the end of the elder folk," he said quietly. "No kingdom remains, no hall, no song. The age of men stands alone now." Captain Doran bowed his head. "And yet, my king, the work of the Eldar endures in you. Through your mother's line, their grace still walks the world." Eldarion gave no answer. He turned his gaze once more towards the east, where the land lay dim beneath gathering clouds. "Then we must prove ourselves worthy of that inheritance," he said. "For I fear that the darkness that took them is not yet finished." That night he sat beside the campfire, poring over the spoils taken from the fallen Easterlings. Among their arms and trappings, he found strange objects, amulets of dark stone, etched with unfamiliar runes, and a map drawn upon tanned hide. The map showed the eastern lands beyond the Sea of Rhûn, mountains, deserts, and, marked at the edge of the world, a symbol shaped like a ring of fire. One of his men studied it and said, "What place is that, my lord? No map of Gondor speaks of it." Eldarion traced the mark with a finger. "It is older than Gondor," he murmured. "My father once spoke of lands beyond the knowledge of the West, vast and wild, where even the servants of Sauron feared to tread. If these Easterlings came from there, Then something has awakened in the far places of the earth. He folded the map and set it aside. At dawn we ride for Dale. King Bard's heir must be warned. From there we shall send word to Rohan and Gondor both. If the East rises again, the free peoples must stand together. Before dawn, he rose and walked alone among the trees. The forest was quiet, but not lifeless. Shoots of green already pushed through the blackened earth, and birds sang faintly in the distance. Kneeling, he pressed his hand to the soil. "You will heal," he whispered. "Your roots go deeper than fire." A soft breeze stirred his hair, and for an instant he thought he heard a voice upon it, a whisper like the echo of laughter. He looked up, but there was no one there. Yet in the heart of the forest, where the stars were reflected in the shallow pools, he fancied he saw a slender figure in grey watching from afar. Then the vision faded, leaving only the rustle of leaves. He returned to camp as the first light of morning touched the treetops. His men were ready, their banners furled, their faces set with resolve. Eldarion mounted his steed and looked once more upon the ruins of the woodland realm. "Farewell, Thranduil," he said softly, "and farewell to your people. The world of men shall remember you." Then, turning south, he raised his sword. "To Dale," he called. "Let word be carried to every corner of the west. The heirs of the shadow rise once more, and Gondor will meet them." The company rode forth beneath the waking sky, their horses' hooves ringing upon the road. Behind them, the forest stood still, veiled in mist, and from somewhere unseen there came a faint glimmer of light, as though the last blessing of the elves lingered still among the leaves. Far to the east, beyond mountains and barren plains, a red dawn flared. Upon a desolate plain stood a host of tents, black against the rising sun. In their midst, a great fire burned, and before it knelt a man clad in armor, the color of blood. His hands were lifted as if in prayer, and around his neck hung an amulet shaped like a broken ring. A voice spoke from the flames, low, cold, and ancient. "The time of the West is ending," it said. "The heirs of light have turned their faces away. Go forth, my servant. Gather the tribes of the East. The world shall burn anew, and the dominion of men shall be as dust." The man bowed low, and the fire flared higher. In its depths, a shape took form, vast and shadowed, crowned with flame. The man lifted his gaze, and in his eyes burned the reflection of that terrible light. "So be it," he whispered. "By the blood of the old lords, we shall rise again." And as the sun rose over the far lands of Rhûn, a new banner unfurled upon the wind, the same sigil that had stained the soil of Erin Lasgalan. A red dawn indeed had come, and with it the first tremor of the storm that would one day shake the kingdoms of men. They rode southward for many days beneath a troubled sky. Clouds gathered over the northern woods, heavy with the scent of storm, and the wind carried whispers from the east, distant thunder, the cry of unseen beasts, and once or twice the echo of war drums rolling like far-off surf. Eldarion felt the weight of every mile. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if some vast hand had drawn back the veil between light and darkness. His company was small now, less than 20 men, weary from battle and long road. Yet they kept their courage, for the blood of the Dunedain still ran in their veins. By day they followed the old trade road along the river running. By night they made their camps in hollows of stone or beneath the shelter of ancient oaks. On the 5th evening they reached the plains of Dale. The city rose from the valley like a jewel, its towers gleaming in the fading sun, and beyond it loomed the grey shoulders of Erebor, the lonely mountain. Smoke curled from the forges of the dwarves, and the sound of hammers echoed faintly in the distance. It was a sight of peace and strength, and yet Eldarian's heart was uneasy. The guards at the gate recognized the banner of the White Tree and led them swiftly to the royal hall. There, upon a throne of carved stone, sat King Brand Thurlekos, grandson of Bard the Bowman. He was a tall man, dark-haired and keen-eyed, wearing a circlet of gold shaped like the wings of a raven. When he saw Eldarion enter, he rose and came forward with open hands. "Welcome, friend of the South," he said warmly. "It has been long since Gondor's king rode so far north. But your face tells me this is no errand of leisure. Speak, and I will hear you." Eldarion bowed. "Dark tidings bring me, Lord of Dale. The last realm of the Elves has fallen. Thranduil, king of the woodland folk, is dead. His halls are ash, his people scattered to the winds." A hush fell upon the court. Brand's face grew grave. "The Elven King, gone? By whose hand?" "Men of the East," Eldarion said. "They bore banners of a rising sun, and their tongues spoke of vengeance. They claim a master stirs again beyond the sea of Rune. We found maps among their dead, marks of hidden places, lands unknown even to my father's lore." Brand frowned deeply. "For years we have heard rumors from the East, tribes uniting, forging weapons of strange design, armies gathering under a single banner. I sent riders to learn the truth, but none returned. If this shadow is real, it is nearer than we thought." Eldarion laid the charred banner of the Easterlings at the king's feet. "It is real, and it spreads. The fire that devoured Erin Lascallan may yet reach your gates." Brand stood silent for a long while, his gaze upon the blackened cloth. Then he said, "If Gondor stands with Dale, we will not fall. My forges shall turn day and night, until every man bears sword and shield. You shall have Gondor's strength," Eldarion promised. "But we must act swiftly. I would ride to Erebor and speak with the dwarves. If this threat rises from the east, their halls may soon stand in peril as well." "So it shall be," Brand said. "Thorin Stonehelm rules there now, grandson of Dain Ironfoot. He will remember the debt his house owes to yours." That night Eldarion slept in a chamber high above the city. Yet though the bed was soft and the room warm, sleep did not come easily. He dreamt again of the sea, dark and endless, and a ship sailing westward. He saw Lherith standing upon the deck, her hand raised in farewell, and behind her the light of the setting sun. But as he watched, the light dimmed, and the sea turned red as blood. From the deeps beneath the waves came a voice calling his name. He woke before dawn, cold with sweat. The dream lingered like a warning. By sunrise, he and a handful of his men set out for the lonely mountain. The road climbed steadily, winding through green valleys and over rocky slopes, until at last they came to the great eastern gate of Erebor. The dwarves who guarded it were wary but courteous, for the name of Elisar's house was still honored there. Word was sent to Thorin Stonehelm, and before long, Eldarion was led through halls of polished granite, lit by golden lanterns. The forges roared, and the air smelled of metal and earth. The dwarves bowed as he passed, their eyes glinting with curiosity and respect. At last they came to a vast chamber, where the throne of the dwarven king stood upon a dais of stone. Thorin Stonehelm was an imposing figure, broad-shouldered, his beard braided with silver rings. When he saw Eldarion, he rose and gave a deep bow. "Welcome, son of Elisar," he said in his deep, rumbling voice. "Your father was a friend to my people, and we have not forgotten the debt we owe him. What brings you to Erebor in these restless times?" So Eldarion told him all that had passed, the fall of Thranduil, the rise of the Easterlings, the sign of the broken ring, and the voice that had spoken in the fire. Thorin listened in silence, his brows furrowed, his great hands gripping the arms of his throne. When Eldarion finished, the king rose slowly. "A shadow reborn," he said. "There are old tales, even among the dwarves, of spirits bound to the earth by oaths and ancient craft. It may be that some remnant of the dark power lingers yet in the east, something older even than Sauron himself." Eldarion frowned. Older? What could be older than the servant of Morgoth? Thorin's eyes gleamed beneath his heavy brow. "The mountains remember, King of Men. There were fires in the deeps before Sauron took shape. Powers that sought dominion, not of spirit, but of stone and flame. When the world was young, they were chained beneath the earth. But bonds weaken with time." "Then if that is true," Eldarion said, "this rising power must be stopped before it breaks the world again." The Dwarf King nodded. "You shall have my aid. I will send messengers to the Iron Hills and to Dale. The dwarves will march beside men if need arises." Eldarion clasped his arm. "Then let our father's friendship live again in us." That night the halls of Erebor rang with the sound of hammers and song. The dwarves forged blades and axes, and banners were prepared for war. Yet beyond the mountain, in the wastes of Rhûn, another forge burned, its fire fed by hatred and old sorcery. Far to the east, upon the plain where the red banner flew, a great host gathered. Thousands of warriors, their armor blackened with soot, their eyes gleaming beneath iron helms. At their head stood the man in blood-colored armor, the one who had knelt before the fire. Around his neck hung the amulet shaped like the broken ring, now glowing with a dull crimson light. He raised his sword, and the host fell silent. "The West grows weak," he cried. "Its kings cling to ashes and memory. But we, sons of the rising sun, shall forge a new dominion. The flame that failed in Mordor shall burn anew in the east." The army roared its ascent, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Overhead, lightning flashed crimson in the clouds. And so began the first movement of the storm. The war that would test the strength of the Fourth Age and decide whether the light of the Eldar's legacy would endure in the hearts of men or perish forever in the fires of a reborn shadow. Winter crept across the northern lands, cloaking the world in pale silence. The river running had begun to freeze along its edges, and the peaks of Erebor gleamed white beneath the sun. Yet within the mountain, the forges of the dwarves burned hotter than ever. Sparks leapt into the air like swarming stars, and the clang of hammers echoed through the deep halls. Eldarion walked among the workshops with Thorin Stonehelm beside him. Everywhere he looked, dwarves labored with tireless precision, shaping steel, tempering blades, carving armor with runes of old power. The air shimmered with heat, the scent of iron heavy and sharp. "The forges of Erebor have not burned so fiercely since the War of the Ring," Thorin said, pride and concern mingling in his voice. "We craft not for glory, but for necessity. The East stirs, and when it comes, it will come with fire." Eldarion nodded. "And what of Dale? Has King Brand answered your summons?" "He has," Thorin replied. "Riders from Dale bring tidings daily. Men gather on the plains, their smiths forge arrows and spears, but their hearts are troubled. They say the sky to the east glows red at night, though no storm brews there." Eldarion frowned. A red sky without storm, always a sign of war. They passed through a great door into the council chamber, where maps lay spread upon a table of stone. Upon them, the lands of the east were drawn in fading ink: the Sea of Rhûn, the river Carnan. and beyond the nameless plains. Over that empty expanse, Eldarion laid the Easterling's map, the one taken from the dead men of the forest. "There," he said, pointing to the mark shaped like a ring of flame. "That is where they gather. A fortress, perhaps, or a temple. If we strike there, we may yet cut the head from the serpent before it grows." Thorin studied the map grimly. "Aye, but the way is perilous. Few roads lead beyond Rune, and none are friendly. You would need allies, swift and sure, lest you vanish in the wastes." "Then we must seek them," Eldarion said. "The free lands must stand together as they did in my father's time. I will ride south to Rohan. King Elfwine will heed the call of Gondor, and from there I shall send word to Minas Tirith. The White City must be warned." "You will not ride alone," Thorin said. "I will send a company of my own kin to guard your road. The friendship of dwarves and men is not so easily broken." Eldarion clasped his arm. "Then let that friendship be tested once more." Before dawn, they took their leave. The gates of Erebor opened, and the company rode forth under banners of white and gold. Snow drifted upon the wind, sparkling like dust upon their cloaks. The mountain's shadow stretched long behind them as they followed the road that wound south toward Rohan's green fields. For many days they rode, through frost-bitten valleys and sleeping woods. At night they camped beside frozen rivers, their fires small and quick lest enemies mark their passage. More than once they saw movement in the distance, shapes gliding over the ridges or pale fires flickering upon the plains, yet none came near. One evening, as the sun sank red over the horizon, Eldarion stood alone upon a rise and looked eastward. There, far away beyond the darkening hills, a faint glow stained the clouds, steady, unnatural, like the reflection of some vast forge. It did not flicker as fire should. It burned. He felt the pull of it in his heart, a weight like memory, cold and powerful. The same sense he had felt in Dol Guldur when the Wraith had spoken to him. "The fire that failed in Mordor shall burn anew," it had said. He wondered if this was what the creature had foreseen. When they reached the borders of the Riddermark, they found the land restless. Riders patrolled the plains, their spears gleaming, and villages were fortified with sharpened stakes. At their approach, horns were blown and banners raised. The golden horse upon green field, proud and bright against the winter sky. At the great hall of Edoras, King Elfwine, son of Eomer, received them with honor. He was tall and fair, with his father's strength and his mother's keen eyes. "Welcome, Eldarion of Gondor," he said. "It is long since our peoples met in council, but you come at a dark hour, I deem." Eldarion recounted all that had befallen, the fall of Thranduil, the rising of the Easterlings, and the red glow that now haunted the east. As he spoke, the mood of the hall grew heavy. Elfwine rose and paced before the hearth. "Long have my riders seen strange lights beyond the river running. Herds have vanished, and travelers tell of black-robed priests walking among the tribes of the east, preaching of vengeance and a new dawn. It seems your enemy and mine are one and the same. Then let us face them together," Eldarion said. "The shadow rises again, though its name is yet unknown. If we do not stand united, the doom that fell upon the elves will come to us as well." Elfwine's hand went to the hilt of his sword. "My father rode beside yours at the Pelennor, and the songs still tell of their glory. The riders of Rohan will answer Gondor's call. When your banners rise, ours will ride beside them." "Then hope yet lives," Eldarion said, though his eyes were distant. That night a feast was held in their honor. Yet though the mead flowed and songs filled the hall, there was unease among the people. The wind howled against the thatched roof, and the flames in the hearth burned with a strange green tinge. Some took it for an ill omen, and before dawn many torches were seen burning upon the eastern horizon. Eldarion did not sleep. He stood upon the balcony of the hall, watching the storm clouds gather above the plains. The wind brought with it the smell of dust and fire, and faintly, very faintly, he heard a drumbeat rolling from far away. It was not thunder, it was war. By morning, scouts rode in bearing grim tidings. A host of Easterlings had crossed the river Carnan and marched westward in great strength. Villages along the northern border were already burning. Behind them, rumor said, marched a figure robed in crimson, whose voice could command flame itself. Eldarion summoned his captains. "We ride now," he said. "The fire cannot be allowed to spread. Gather the riders and send word to Dale and Erebor. Tell them the storm is upon us." By midday, the fields of Rohan thundered with hooves. Thousands of riders answered their king's call, their banners streaming in the wind. Eldarion rode at Elfwine's side, his cloak whipping about him, his heart steady, though the shadow loomed ahead. Far to the east, the red glow deepened, spreading across the sky like dawn reversed. The land trembled, as if some ancient power stirred beneath the earth. And as the sun fell behind the mountains, the drums began to beat once more, slow, steady, and merciless. The war of the Fourth Age had begun. Snow fell thick and heavy upon the plains of Rohan, blurring the line between sky and earth. The riders moved like phantoms through the white haze, their banners stiff with frost, their cloaks crusted with ice. Beneath the muffling silence of the storm, the faint thunder of hooves was all that marked their passage. Eldarion rode at the head of the column beside Elfwine, his eyes fixed eastward, where the sky burned faintly crimson beyond the snow, a wound upon the horizon that would not heal. By dawn, the storm began to break. The wind dropped, and the clouds tore open, revealing a pale sun. They rode into a land scarred by fire. Villages stood in ruin, blackened timbers and smoke rising from half-buried embers. The bodies of the slain lay where they had fallen, men and women alike, their faces frozen in terror. Elfwine reined in his horse beside a fallen watchtower. "The border has fallen," he said grimly. "They are already within my realm." Eldarion dismounted and knelt beside one of the bodies. The dead man's armor bore the horse of Rohan, but his sword was shattered. "He fought to the last," Eldarion said softly. "But they were too many." From the east came the low boom of distant drums. The riders lifted their heads, uneasy. "Scouts," Eldarion ordered. "Find where they march, and how many." 4 men rode off into the mist. The rest formed ranks and pressed onward, the snow crunching beneath their horses' hooves. As they advanced, the sound of the drums grew louder, joined now by the harsh blare of horns. By mid-morning, the scouts returned, their faces grave. "They are near, my lord," said one. "A great host, no less than 10,000. They march in a long line across the plain, driving captives before them, our people." Elfwine's hand clenched upon his reins. "Then we meet them here, before they reach Adorus." Eldarion nodded. "We cannot let them pass. The shadow will break here, or not at all." The horns of Rohan rang out across the plain, clear and fierce. From every hill and hollow came the answering call as the riders formed their ranks. They were but 3,000 strong, yet their courage was like iron. Spears glinted, banners streamed, and the ground shook with the pounding of hooves as they formed into lines. Eldarion rode to the center, his sword drawn. The blade shone white in the winter light, its runes burning faintly. "Men of the Mark," he cried, "sons of the West, The world darkens again, but we are not yet fallen. The light of the free peoples still burns, and it shall not be quenched by fire or fear. Ride with me now, for Rohan, for Gondor, for the memory of the kings that were." A roar rose from the riders, fierce and strong, echoing across the frozen plain. The drums answered, and out of the east the enemy came. They were a sea of black and crimson, their ranks endless beneath the pale sky. At their head rode the man in the armor of blood, the chieftain of the east. His banner bore the mark of the broken ring, now wreathed in flame. Behind him marched his host, men of Rune, pale-eyed and hardened, their helms crowned with cruel spikes, war beasts from the eastern deserts, clad in iron, and among them cloaked figures bearing staves that glowed with a sickly light. Elfwine raised his hand, and the riders of Rohan lowered their spears. "Now!" he shouted. The plain exploded in thunder. The riders surged forward, their lances leveled, their war cries piercing the air. The earth trembled beneath their charge. The Easterling host answered with arrows that darkened the sky, but the riders did not falter. They struck the enemy line like a wave of steel and wind. The first clash was terrible. Spears shattered, horses screamed, and the snow turned red. Eldarian's sword cut a path through the press, its light flaring each time it fell. Around him, the riders fought with the fury of the mark, swift, relentless, unyielding. Yet the enemy was vast, and their numbers did not break. From the rear of the host, the crimson-armored chieftain raised his hand. The ground shuddered, and a column of fire burst from the earth, sweeping across the battlefield. Men and horses fell, consumed by flame. Eldarian shielded his face, feeling the heat scorch his armor. "Witchcraft!" cried one of the captains. "He commands the fire itself!" Eldarian spurred forward through the smoke. "Then we end the witchcraft at its source!" He cut down a dozen foes as he forced his way toward the chieftain. The man turned to face him, his helm crowned with horns, his eyes glowing red through the visor. "So the son of Elisar comes to die," he said, his voice like a furnace's breath. "Your kind has threatened the West before," Eldarian answered, "and every time you have fallen to dust." The chieftain laughed, a low, cruel sound. "We are not as we were. The fire that failed in Mordor lives again in me. I am the herald of the flame imperishable." He thrust out his hand, and fire leapt forth, striking Eldarian's shield. The wood blackened and split, the metal rim glowing white-hot. Eldarian cast it aside and charged. Their blades met with a sound like thunder. Sparks flew, steel screamed, and the ground shook beneath their feet. Around them the battle raged. The riders wheeled and struck, cutting deep into the enemy ranks. But for every foe that fell, two more took his place. Elfwine led a charge on the left flank, scattering archers and breaking through to the captives, freeing them amid the chaos. Eldarian fought on, the cold light of his sword meeting the crimson fire of the chieftain's blade. The man was strong, unnaturally strong, and his strikes carried the weight of shadow. But Eldarian remembered his father's words. Hope is not victory, yet without it, victory cannot be born. He feinted, turned, and struck low. His sword bit into the chieftain's side, piercing the armor. The fire dimmed in the man's eyes, and he staggered back, snarling. "You cannot kill the flame," he hissed. "It is in the blood of men now." Then, before Eldarian could strike again, a wave of force burst outward, flinging both men apart. The chieftain's followers surged around him, dragging him back toward the east. The drums sounded again, a deep, retreating thunder. The Easterling host began to fall back, their banners streaming. The riders of Rohan gave chase, driving them from the plain. When at last the sun set, the snow was trampled and red with blood, and the fields were littered with the fallen. Eldarion stood beside Elfwine upon the ridge, gazing eastward. The glow upon the horizon still burned, though the enemy had fled. "It is not over," he said quietly. "He will return, and with him, the fire." Elfwine sheathed his sword. "Then let him come. We have held the line this day, and the free peoples still stand." But even as he spoke, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and iron. Far away, beyond the river and the mountains, the red dawn flared once more, and Eldarion, watching it, knew that the war was only beginning. For 3 days and nights, the wounded were gathered from the field. The snow was red and blackened, and the wind that swept over the plains carried the smell of smoke and iron. The Battle of the White Plain, men would later call it, where Rohan's riders and Gondor's king turned back the first wave of the east. But for those who had fought there, it was no victory, only a pause before the next storm. Eldarion walked among the fallen as the dawn rose grey and bitter. He moved silently, his cloak torn and his armor dented, his eyes shadowed by weariness. Around him, the healers worked without rest. The moans of the wounded drifted through the morning mist, mingling with the creak of carts and the low voices of men digging graves. He paused beside a pyre being built of broken shields and splintered spears. Among the dead, he recognized faces, captains who had ridden beside him in the charge, men who had stood unflinching before the fire. He bowed his head and whispered a prayer in the tongue of Númenor, the same his father had spoken over the fallen at Pelennor. Elfwine approached from the east, his arm bound with linen, his face pale but resolute. "The enemy has withdrawn beyond the river," he said. "Our scouts follow them at a distance, but their trail is cold. It seems they flee to the mountains." Eldarion looked toward the horizon, where the faint red glow still pulsed behind the distant ridges. "Not flee," he said quietly. "Regroup. The fire in that man's blood will not be quenched so easily." He retreats to gather strength. "Then we must do the same," Elfwine replied. "Rohan cannot stand another battle so soon. Our herds are scattered, our fields burned. Dale and Erebor must send aid, or we will fall before the spring." "They will send it," said Eldarion, though his tone was grim. "Thorin Stonehelm swore it, and Gondor will march before the season turns." He turned his gaze southward. The white mountains rose far away, their peaks veiled in cloud. Beyond them lay the Anduin and the shining towers of Minas Tirith. His heart yearned for that city, for the marble halls where his father had ruled, for the comfort of familiar faces. But he knew he could not return. Not yet. That night, they made their camp beside the river. Fires were lit, though the men kept them low, wary of drawing the enemy's eye. The stars were hidden behind drifting clouds, and the air was heavy with snow. Eldarion sat apart, his sword across his knees. The blade still gleamed faintly, as though some inner light refused to fade. Elfwine joined him, carrying a flask of wine. "You fought like your father," he said, lowering himself beside him. "I saw the fire leap from your blade. It gave the men courage." Eldarion smiled faintly. "I only did what was needed. Yet I fear this foe is unlike any my father faced. The chieftain spoke of a flame that cannot die, one that burns in the blood of men." Elfwine's brow furrowed. "Madness, perhaps. Or truth," Eldarion murmured. "We men have always walked close to shadow. Ambition, pride, hunger for power. These are the seeds from which evil grows. If the flame he speaks of is that same old greed, then it indeed burns within us all." They sat in silence, the river whispering beside them. At length, Elfwine said, "When the snows melt, the east will come again. But next time, we will be ready." Eldarion nodded. "Aye. The world has grown quiet since the passing of the elves. But their watch is ended. Ours begins." Before dawn, a rider came from the north. His horse was lathered and trembling, and his face pale with fear. He was one of Thorin's messengers, his cloak torn and burned. "My lords," he gasped, falling to his knees. "Erebor is besieged. The enemy has come by night through the mountains. A host greater than before. 30,000 or more. They wield fire that cannot be quenched, and the very stone burns beneath their hands." Elfwine's face hardened. By what road did they come? No force could pass the iron hills unseen. "They did not come by road," the rider whispered. "They came through the deeps, through tunnels forgotten since the elder days. They rose from the earth itself." Eldarion felt a chill that no fire could warm. "Then the dwarves were right," he said. "There are older powers beneath the mountains, fires that never died." At once he gave command. "Elfwine, ride to Adorus and muster every rider who can bear arms. I will march north with what men remain. We cannot let Erebor fall, for if the mountain is taken, all the north will burn." Elfwine gripped his arm. "Then we shall meet again upon that field. Ride swift, my friend, and may the Valar guard you." By sunset, Eldarion and his small company were on the road. They rode through the deepening night, following the frozen river toward the mountain realm. The sky to the north flickered with strange lights, green and red, as if fire danced among the stars. After 3 days' ride, they reached the Vale of Dale. Smoke rose from the city's outskirts, and the clash of battle echoed faintly from the mountain beyond. The enemy was already there. Eldarion led his men through the lower streets, where dwarves and men fought side by side against the dark host. The attackers bore torches of unnatural flame, their faces hidden behind masks of bronze. Arrows hissed through the air, striking sparks against stone. At the great gate of Erebor, Eldarion found Thorin Stonehelm standing with his guard. The Dwarf King's armor was black with soot, his beard singed, yet his eyes burned with unyielding fire. "You came," Thorin said, gripping Eldarion's hand. "I feared you would find only ruins." "You still stand," Eldarion answered. "That is enough." They turned to the battlefield. The enemy pressed hard against the gate, their siege engines throwing bolts of fire. Behind them, upon a rise of stone, the crimson-armored chieftain stood once more, his sword blazing like a shard of the sun. Thorin pointed toward him. "There is your foe, son of Elessar. He commands the fire that eats our stone. Strike him down, and his host may falter." Eldarion's gaze fixed upon the figure. "Then we end it here." The gates of Erebor opened, and the defenders poured forth in a surge of steel and fury. Eldarion rode at their head, his blade gleaming white against the red of the enemy's fire. The clash shook the very mountain. Through the smoke and din, he saw the chieftain turn, and their eyes met across the field. The man raised his sword, and the flames around him leapt higher. "Come, King of the West!" he shouted. "Let the world see which fire burns stronger." Eldarion urged his horse forward, the snow and ash swirling around him. The two met at last upon the broken stones before the mountain gate, light against fire, past against future. And as their blades struck, the very earth trembled, and the red sky above seemed to split with thunder. The fate of the North, and of all Middle-earth, hung in that moment's balance. The clash of their blades rang like the cry of a falling star. White light met red flame, and for a heartbeat the whole valley blazed with the fury of their duel. The chieftain's sword struck with the strength of 10 men, each blow hammering against Eldarion's guard, until sparks burst from the steel. Yet Anduril's air, bright as the morning star, did not yield. Around them the battle raged, a sea of noise and chaos. Dwarves and men fought shoulder to shoulder, their shields blackened, their axes red. The fire-born Easterlings pressed hard, their torches casting wild shadows upon the mountain wall. Smoke rolled across the field, thick and choking, and the wind carried the stench of brimstone. Eldarion's blade swept low, then high, driving the chieftain back step by step. "Your fire burns bright," he said, his breath hard and quick, "but it is not the fire of life. It is the flame of ruin." The man laughed, though blood glistened upon his side. "All fire destroys, son of kings. That is its truth, and its gift." He raised his hand, and the ground trembled. From the fissures in the stone, tongues of flame leapt skyward, forcing Eldarion to retreat. The man's armor blazed crimson, the runes upon his breastplate glowing like molten gold. For an instant, his face was laid bare beneath the helm, a pale visage marked with scars that burned faintly as though branded from within. "I was forged in the ruins of Mordor," he hissed, "born from the ashes of the eye. The spirit that dwelt in the fire chose me, and through me it shall live again." Eldarion steadied himself, lifting his sword before him. "Then it chose a mortal vessel, and that shall be its undoing." He leapt forward, striking with all his strength. Anduril's air met the burning blade, and the shock of it hurled both men apart. The air rippled with heat. Shards of ice and stone flew like hail. When the smoke cleared, Eldarion stood upon one knee, his sword planted in the earth. The chieftain knelt opposite him, breathing hard. For a long moment, neither moved. The noise of battle dimmed around them, as if the world itself waited for what would follow. Then, slowly, the chieftain rose. He looked eastward, toward the horizon, where a faint red glow pulsed beyond the mountains. "It awakens," he murmured. "The ancient fire. You cannot stop it now." He raised his sword once more, but his strength faltered. Eldarion saw the moment's weakness, the tremor in his hand. He surged forward, driving the blade of his father's through the man's heart. A terrible cry split the air, neither human nor beast, but something older, something vast. The chieftain's armor cracked, light spilling from within like molten metal. His body stiffened, his face contorted in both rage and wonder. "You cannot kill," he gasped. Then he was gone. The flames consumed him utterly, leaving only ashes that swirled upon the wind. For an instant, silence held the field. Then the host of the east broke. Leaderless, they wavered, and the defenders of Erebor surged forward with a shout that echoed through the valley. The enemy scattered, fleeing into the night, their fires extinguished. When it was done, Eldarion stood amid the ruin. The snow had melted to mud beneath the heat of the battle, and steam rose from the ground. He looked down upon the ashes of his foe, but even as he watched, the wind swept them away, carried eastward toward the red horizon. Thorin Stonehelm came to stand beside him, his beard matted with blood. "It is finished," the Dwarf King said. Eldarion shook his head. No, this was only a hand of the fire, not its heart. You heard his words. The ancient flame wakes again. Something stirs beyond the mountains, and he was but its messenger. Thorin's face was grim. Then the north will stand ready, whatever comes. Erebor will not fall while breath remains in me. Eldarion clasped his arm. "Nor Gondor while I bear my crown." For 3 days they labored to tend the wounded and bury the dead. The snows fell again, soft and pure, covering the blackened earth as if the world sought to hide its scars. Yet even beneath that stillness, a foreboding lingered. Strange lights flickered in the night sky, green and red, shifting like banners of fire. On the third morning, a messenger came from Dale, bringing word that Elfwine's riders were on the march. Rohan rode north, answering Gondor's call. The alliance of the West was reforged at last, though none rejoiced in it. For all knew this war was not of kingdoms, but of the world itself. That night, Eldarion stood upon the battlements of Erebor, gazing east. The sky there glowed faintly, as though dawn burned behind the mountains. But it was no dawn. The light did not rise or fade. It pulsed like a living heart. He thought of his father, and of the long peace that had followed the War of the Ring. He thought of the elves who had departed, of Lehereth's parting words. Guard what remains, for even light may fade, if not tended. Was this the fading she had foreseen? He could not tell, but he felt in his bones that the world was changing again. Behind him, a soft voice spoke. "You do not sleep, my king." He turned to see one of the surviving elves of Thranduil's kin, a tall figure cloaked in grey. "Sleep is a gift that seldom comes in times such as these," Eldarion said. "Do you mean to depart now that your king is gone?" The elf looked eastward, his expression distant. "Some of us will sail when spring comes, but others will remain until the end to see the last of what we once loved. The world of men belongs to you now, yet its fate touches ours still. We will not abandon it wholly." Eldarion inclined his head. "Then we will fight together." For a while they stood in silence, watching the distant glow. Then the elf spoke again, his voice low and troubled. "There is something older than Sauron stirring there, a name forgotten even by the wise. Fire that fell in the first days, when the world was still young. It was thought buried beneath the east, chained by the valor themselves. But chains may rust, even those of gods." Eldarion turned sharply. "You speak of the flame imperishable, the very spark that made the world?" "Not the flame itself," the elf answered, "but its reflection, a false light, twisted by the darkness, the shadow of creation. If it wakes, it will not come as one master of evil, but as fire unbound, and fire consumes all." The wind sighed over the mountain, cold and bitter. Eldarion looked east once more, his heart heavy. "Then we will need more than swords to face it." "Perhaps," the elf said, "or perhaps only the courage of men will suffice. The Valar have long withdrawn from this world. It is you who must guard it now." When morning came, Eldarion summoned his captains. Messengers rode south to Rohan, west to Gondor, and north to the Iron Hills. Word would spread through all the free peoples. The fire of the east hadn't died. And though peace had been won upon that day, the King of Men knew it was but the stillness before a greater storm, one that would test the courage of all who still walked beneath the fading light of Middle-earth. He looked to the sky, where the faint red shimmer yet lingered, and whispered into the wind, "Let it come. The heirs of the West still stand." Winter deepened across the lands of the north, and a hush fell upon Middle-earth that was not peace, but the waiting stillness before the breaking of a storm. The snows lay heavy on the plains, and even the rivers moved sluggishly, crusted with ice. Yet beneath that quiet surface, messengers rode, forges burned, and the hearts of men and dwarves were restless. In Erebor's deep halls, Thorin Stonehelm forged alliances, as his forefathers had once forged blades. To the Iron Hills he sent word, calling every hammer to war. Southward, to Dale, went riders of the Dunedain, bidding King Brand muster all who could bear arms. And in the west, horns sounded from the green fields of Rohan to the white towers of Minas Tirith, for Eldarion had sent his heralds to awaken the strength of Gondor. Weeks passed, and the winds from the east grew strange. They carried a heat that no winter wind should bear, a dry, bitter breath that whispered of fire. At night, the skies shimmered red and gold, like embers drifting in the upper air. The stars seemed dimmer now, their light veiled by smoke that rose from unseen plains. Eldarion stood often upon the ramparts of Erebor, gazing toward that crimson horizon. The mountain loomed behind him, vast and patient, but even its heart seemed uneasy. The dwarves spoke of tremors deep in the stone, of a rumbling like distant thunder that came and went with the turning of the moon. One night, when the air hung heavy and the snow melted upon the stones, though no sun had touched them, Eldarion gathered his captains in the great hall. The firelight danced upon the golden pillars, and the faces of men and dwarves alike shone with determination and weariness. "The enemy moves," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "The scouts have returned from Rhûn. They speak of a great host gathering beyond the sea. Tribes united that once were scattered, bound by one will. The fires of the east burn higher every night. We can wait no longer." Thorin Stonehelm rose, his hand resting upon the hilt of his axe. "Then speak your counsel, son of Orlesar. Shall we strike first, or stand upon our walls and meet them when they come?" Eldarion's gaze swept over the gathered leaders. Dwarves with faces like carved stone, captains of Dale still bearing the marks of battle, and a few elves, tall and silent, who lingered though their kind had all but vanished from the world. "We strike," he said, "not to conquer, but to hold back the fire. If we wait, it will consume all. The forges of the east grow too strong. We must find the source of their power, the thing that stirs beneath the mountains, and end it, or this age will fall as the last nearly did." A murmur ran through the hall, low and uneasy. Thorin frowned. "You would lead us into the very heart of the East, into the lands where even maps end." "I will," Eldarion said simply, "for that is where this war was born. The shadow we fight now is not a remnant of Sauron's will alone, but something older, deeper. It seeks not dominion, but rebirth. If it rises, all the world will burn." From the edge of the gathering, one of the elves spoke. His name was Leren, one of the last of Thranduil's kin. His voice was soft as wind in leaves. "Long ago, the Valar chained a power beneath the earth, a fragment of the flame, imperishable, that had been twisted by darkness. They buried it deep, far to the east, where the land was young and broken. If that flame wakes again, not even the sea will stop it." Eldarion turned to him. "Then we go where it sleeps." There was silence, save for the crackle of the hearth. Then Thorin struck the butt of his axe against the floor. "So be it. The sons of Durin will march beside the sons of Elendil. We will not let the fire devour the world that our fathers built." And so it was decided. When dawn broke, preparations began. Dwarves filled the forges day and night, crafting weapons that gleamed with runes of old power. The smiths of Dale worked beside them, reforging the armor that had once been worn by the kings of men. From Rohan came the sound of horns, and from the south, word that Gondor's legions were marching. Within weeks, the valley before Erebor was filled with armies. Banners snapped in the cold wind. The white tree of Gondor, the horse of Rohan, the raven of Dale, the hammer of Durin. The host of the west had risen again, not seen in such number since the fall of Sauron. Yet for all their might, a shadow hung over them. None knew what awaited them beyond the mountains. Before they departed, Eldarion stood before the gathered host. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of the ages. "Sons of the West," he said, "we go not for glory or gold, but for the world itself. The fire that rises in the east will not stop with one kingdom or one race. If it is not quenched now, it will sweep over every mountain, every plain, every sea. We stand together, or we fall together. Let this day mark the unity of the free peoples once more." A cheer rose, deep, fierce, and full of defiance. It rolled across the valley like thunder. The horns of Dale and Erebor answered it, and the drums of the dwarves shook the mountain's roots. That night, before the march, Eldarion wandered alone into the snow. The stars were dim behind drifting clouds. As he looked east, he thought he saw movement upon the horizon, shapes vast and indistinct, like wings of smoke unfurling against the sky. And faintly he heard again the echo of that voice from Dol Guldur, whispering from the dark, "You cannot unmake the fire." He drew his cloak tighter and returned to camp, his resolve set. When dawn came, they rode out. The host moved like a great river of steel and shadow, winding through the passes of the Iron Hills and down into the desolate plains beyond. Snow gave way to ash. The air grew hot and bitter. In the distance, the red light burned ever brighter, pulsing like a heart beneath the land. Eldarion rode at the head of the column, his banner streaming beside the banners of Rohan and Dale. Behind him came the dwarves, their axes glinting, their drums steady and grim. As the sun sank and the stars vanished behind the haze, the King of Gondor raised his gaze to the east. There, at the edge of the world, he saw what none living had ever seen. A tower of fire rising from the plains, vast and silent, crowned by lightning. It reached higher than the clouds, a beacon of flame against the darkening sky. And in that moment, Eldarion knew the truth. The war of the Fourth Age would not be fought for land or crown, but for the very soul of Middle-earth. He lifted his sword, and its white light shone against the red glare. "Ride," he said, his voice steady. "Ride to the east." And the armies of the west moved forward, banners bright against the gathering storm. The march eastward seemed endless, a journey across a world turning to cinder. For many days the host of the west moved through wastelands where no bird flew and no living thing stirred. The snow of the north had given way to barren plains, cracked and scorched, where rivers had boiled dry and the wind reeked of sulphur. Yet still they pressed on, banners streaming against the blood-red sky. At night, the fires of their camp cast long shadows upon the dust. The men whispered of strange shapes seen beyond the glow, giant forms that moved like smoke, and lights that danced without flame. Even the dwarves, who feared little that walked or crawled, kept their weapons close at hand. The elves among them said little, but their eyes were dark with foreboding. Eldarion rode always at the front, tireless though the days were long. The light of his sword seemed to burn brighter in that desolate land, a single star defying the deepening gloom. Often he would pause upon some high ridge, scanning the horizon where the red glow throbbed like a living wound. It grew stronger with each passing day, until at last it seemed not distant, but all around them, an unseen sun beneath the earth. On the 12th day, they reached the Sea of Run. Yet it was no longer a sea, but a vast pit of ash and brine. Steam rose from its black surface, and cracks opened along the shore, belching fire. The air shimmered with heat, though no sun pierced the sky. "This land is dying," said Thorin Stonehelm, his deep voice echoing hollowly. "If the fire beneath it breaks free, all the east will be lost." Eldarion nodded. "And if it is not stopped here, the west will follow." They turned south along the edge of the lake, following the trail left by the retreating enemy. At dusk, scouts returned bearing grave news. the Easterlings were massing upon a plain beyond the ruined shores, a host vast enough to darken the horizon. At its center, they said, stood a fortress of black glass, newly raised, glowing from within as if filled with molten stone. The captains gathered in council that night. The wind howled outside the tent, carrying sparks of fire. "It is madness to face them in open battle," said Brand of Dale. "They outnumber us, 3-1. "Then we take their heart," Eldarion answered. "The fortress draws its power from the flame beneath it. If that power is broken, their host will scatter." Thorin grunted. "And how do you break a fortress made of fire?" Eldarion's gaze was calm. "By entering it." A murmur rose among the captains, but none could offer another way. At last Thorin said, "Then I will go with you. A dwarf's hand is steady where stone and flame meet." "And mine," said Leren, the elf, his pale face lit by the red glare. "There are songs of such fire, though none were meant to be sung again. Perhaps the light that was once of the elves may yet oppose it." Eldarion inclined his head. "Then so be it. At dawn, the armies will strike to draw the host away. The 3 of us will enter the fortress. If we succeed, the flame dies. If we fail, then the world burns." No one slept that night. The drums of the enemy thundered across the plains, and the ground trembled as though some vast creature moved beneath it. When morning came, the sky was as dark as iron, and the red glow turned the air to blood. The horns of the west sounded. From the ridges and ravines, the armies of Gondor, Rohan, Dale, and Erebor swept forth in a roar of steel. The plain erupted into chaos. Arrows streaked through the air, spears clashed, and the earth itself shook beneath the fury of battle. Through the storm rode Eldarion, Thorin, and Leren. Cloaked in ash and shadow, they slipped through the melee toward the black tower, rising at the plain's center. The fortress seemed alive, its walls pulsing faintly with light. Great cracks ran through its surface, through which molten fire flowed like veins of blood. At its base yawned a gate carved with runes none could read. Before it stood no guards, for none could stand the heat that poured forth. The 3 entered without pause. Inside, the air shimmered with unbearable light. The walls were smooth as glass, and every sound echoed tenfold. As they descended, the heat grew, until the stones beneath their feet glowed faintly. At last they came to a vast hall, the heart of the fortress. There, suspended above a chasm of flame, hung a crystal sphere, vast and blazing. Within it flickered shapes, faces, wings, shadows, each twisting in agony, bound in the light. The flame of the east pulsed within, alive, aware. Leren drew a sharp breath. It is no mere fire. It is a spirit, one of the ancient ones, cast down and chained in the world's beginning. The chieftain was its vessel. Now it seeks another. Even as he spoke, the light flared. A voice filled the chamber, deep and terrible. "At last, the sons of the West come to kneel. Once I served the Dark One. Now I am free. The world shall burn clean, and from its ashes I shall rise anew." Thorin raised his axe, though the heat scorched his beard. "You'll rise to nothing but ruin." He struck the crystal, and sparks flew. But no crack appeared. The voice laughed, a sound like breaking mountains. Eldarion lifted his sword, and its white light blazed fiercely, clashing against the red. "By the light of the West, by the blood of kings, I forbid your rising," he cried. The sword struck. For an instant, darkness and flame met, locked in a silent struggle. Then the crystal shuddered, and a fissure split its heart. A scream filled the hall, and fire burst forth in all directions. "Go!" Eldarion shouted. "Run!" but Thorin stood his ground, gripping the chains that held the crystal aloft. "If this fire is to die, let it die with me." He heaved, his strength titanic, and the chains snapped. The crystal plunged into the chasm below, shattering upon the molten rock. The explosion that followed was like the birth of the sun. The fortress cracked and roared. Léorin seized Eldarian's arm, dragging him toward the collapsing gate. They burst into the open as the tower behind them erupted in a storm of flame. The armies upon the plain stopped as one. The black host faltered, their banners burning to ash. Then the red light that had stained the sky began to fade. One by one, the fires upon the ground died, leaving only smoke and silence. When the wind cleared, the fortress was gone. Only a great crater remained, glowing faintly in the twilight. Eldarian stood upon the ruin, his face streaked with soot, his eyes hollow. "Thorin," he whispered. Léorin bowed his head. "He has gone to the halls of his fathers. Few will sing a greater song." The King of Gondor looked eastward. The horizon, once red, was pale now, the light of true dawn spreading across the world. The War of the Fourth Age was ended. The flame was quenched, though its memory would linger in the heart of the earth. As the armies of the West gathered around their king, Eldarian raised his sword once more. Its light, though dimmed, still shone clear. "This day we haven't won glory," he said softly, "but we have bought the world one more dawn. Let us make it worthy." The wind carried his words across the silent plain. The banners of men and dwarves stirred once more, and the sun rose upon Middle-earth, golden, untainted, and free. Yet far away, in the depths beneath the world, a single ember still glowed, waiting, patient, and eternal. For no fire, once kindled in the heart of creation, ever truly dies.